Hey, Founders Place at home. I've been missing y'all so much, but I hope everybody's staying safe and doing well. And this is a devotion about the prophets. Now, you might be wondering, what are the prophets doing in the Bible? Well, the prophets have a very, very important role in the Hebrew Scriptures, which is this part of our Bible, and the New Testament is just about this part of our Bible, so there's a lot about prophets in the first part. Prophets exist when Israel asked for kings. That's what happened. Israel asked for a king, and God said, well, you can have a king, but I'm going to give you a prophet. You see, God always asks his people to be different than the rest of the world. And when God's people wanted to have a king, like their neighbors wanted to have a king, God said, well, you're not being different if you do that. And so I'm going to give you prophets to speak my truth to you. Now, when you look all about in the Old Testament, I like to call it the Hebrew Scriptures, but when you look all through the Old Testament, you see that there's stories about prophets and then there's stories by prophets. So, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, those are stories about prophets like Samuel and Elisha and Elijah. But then, around 800 years before Jesus' birth, or the 8th century before Jesus' birth, actually 700 years before Jesus' birth, a prophet named Amos was the first one to write his words down. So Amos is the oldest prophet that we have an anthology of their words. Very important prophet. By that time, God's people had split into two countries. See, they weren't being different the way that God asked them to be different. They sort of warred on each other and didn't like each other. And you had a large country in the north called Israel and a small country in the south called Judah, with the capital city Jerusalem. Amos came from Judah, and he came up north to Israel. And Israel had more money, and they had elaborate worship, and they had a great economy. They just weren't different in the way that God asked them to be different. And Amos had something to say. So I want you to use your imagination and imagine St. Luke's all tricked out on a Sunday morning, and the choir is there, and the procession has come in, and the clergy are all bejeweled in their vestments, and a rough-hewn prophet walks down the center aisle, because that's exactly what Amos did on a Sabbath morning in the worship center in front of the king and all of his courtiers. And here's the deal. They had a paid choir, they had a big endowment, they had a well-run machine in terms of their temple, and then they had the king, and they had the court, and they had business, but they weren't taking care of the poor. They weren't different the way that God asked them to be different. They weren't taking care of the poor. They weren't kind, and they weren't attending to the needy. And so Amos, the prophet from Judah, walks in front of the king of Israel, and he says these words. This is God speaking to those folks in church. I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. The offerings and well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. And that Hebrew word noise is the grinding of a chariot wheel. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Their music is noise to God. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Friends, prophets came to remind us of this. If we're not different the way that God asks us to be different, if we're not kind, and if we're not just, and if we're not looking out for the poor and the needy and the left behinds, if we're not taking care of each other, then we're not being God's people in the way that he asks us to. So this is what prophets do. They remind us, and they call us to repent. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next week for more Bible study.